I didn't sign up to be a nurse, Brian, and I'm definitely not going to be a widow in waiting. Those were the first words I heard when I finally woke up. My vision was blurry. My head felt like it was trapped in a vice. I tried to move my hand to reach for her, but nothing happened. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. The ICU was a nightmare of white lights and constant beeping. The smell of bleach was so strong it made my eyes sting. I saw my wife, Ashley, standing at the foot of my bed. She looked perfect. Her hair was done, her makeup was flawless, and she was holding a stack of papers. She wasn't alone. A man in a sharp suit stood behind her. He didn't look like a doctor. He looked like trouble. "The doctors told me everything," Ashley said. Her voice was cold. There were no tears, no shaky breath. Severe spinal trauma. They say you might never walk again. They're talking about years of rehab and 24-hour care. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I managed a small rasp, but she ignored it. "Do you have any idea what this does to my life?" she asked. She actually sounded angry at me for being paralyzed. "I'm in my prime, Brian. I'm not spending the next 30 years pushing a wheelchair and living off a disability check. I have goals. I have a reputation." She signaled to the man in the suit. He handed her a pen. "These are divorce papers," she said calmly. "Since you can't sign them, my lawyer has already filed an emergency petition. I've moved the money from our joint accounts to a private one. I'm keeping the apartment and the car. It's only fair, considering I'm the one who has to go out there and rebuild while you're stuck here." She leaned over the bed rail. I could smell her expensive perfume. It used to be my favorite smell. Now it made me want to gag. "I'm leaving, Brian," she whispered. "Don't try to find me, and don't expect me to pay for this room. You're on your own now." She turned on her heel and walked out. The glass doors slid shut with a hiss. She thought she was escaping a burden. She had no idea she had just started my real story. Before we get to the part where I take everything back, I need you to understand how we got here. But first, do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment saying, "Loyalty is everything." It helps us keep telling these stories and lets me know you're on my side. I met Ashley 6 years ago. To her, I was just Brian Miller, a guy with a decent job in middle management. I lived in a small apartment and drove an old sedan. She loved me at first, but it was a project love. She thought she could mold me into a high-powered executive. What she didn't know was that I was already powerful. My father is one of the wealthiest real estate moguls in the country. We had a falling out years ago because I wanted to prove I could make it on my own. I wanted to find a woman who loved me for who I was, not for my bank account. I thought Ashley was that woman. I was wrong. Every year we were together, she grew more resentful. She would see her friends getting designer bags or going on luxury cruises, and she would look at me with pure disappointment. "Is this it, Brian?" she'd ask. "Are we just going to be ordinary forever?" I kept my secret because I wanted to see if she would stay through the hard times. I thought love meant sticking together when things got tough. I was planning to tell her the truth on our next anniversary, to tell her we never had to worry about money ever again. Then the accident happened. A truck ran a red light. The metal crushed around me, and my world went black. Ashley didn't see a husband in pain. She saw a broken toy that was no longer worth playing with. 2 days after Ashley walked out, the reality of her betrayal hit me. A hospital administrator came into my room. She didn't look happy. "Mr. Miller," she said, looking at her tablet, "we have a problem. Your wife has officially removed you from her insurance policy. She also notified us that she is no longer responsible for your medical bills." I stared at her, unable to move my head. "Since the joint accounts are empty," the woman continued, "we have to move you. You're being transferred to the general ward, and we've had to cancel your private physical therapy sessions until payment is secured." Within an hour, I was wheeled out of my quiet room. They put me in a crowded ward with 3 other people. It was loud, it smelled like old food, and the nurses were too busy to check on me more than once every few hours. I lay there in the dark, listening to the man in the next bed cough. I had nothing, no money, no wife, and no way to move my legs. I felt like a ghost. I had 2 choices. I could lie there and wait for the end, or I could remember the one thing Ashley forgot. She thought I was a nobody. She forgot that I have my father's blood in my veins. And in my family, we don't just survive. We win. The general ward was a nightmare. Every hour felt like a week. The pain in my back was a constant, dull roar, but the silence from my phone was worse. Ashley hadn't just left, she had erased me. I spent my days staring at a crack in the ceiling that looked like a lightning bolt. I wondered if this was how my life ended, stuck in a room with 3 strangers, waiting for a recovery that might never come. The nurses were kind, but they were overworked. They didn't have time to sit and talk. They just changed my IV, checked my vitals, and moved on. I felt like a piece of equipment that was slowly breaking down. My bank app showed a balance of 0. Ashley had even taken the small savings I'd kept from my grandfather. She had cleaned me out completely. I reached my breaking point on the 5th night. I tried to lift my right leg, just an inch, just to see if there was any life left in me. Nothing happened. My brain sent the signal, but my body refused to listen. I laid my head back and felt a hot tear slide down my temple. I was 32 years old, and I was finished. I closed my eyes and prayed for sleep that wouldn't end. The next morning, the ward went quiet. It wasn't the usual lull between breakfast and rounds. It was a heavy, pressured silence. I heard the sound of expensive leather shoes clicking on the floor. It was a firm, rhythmic sound, the sound of someone who owned the ground they walked on. The blue curtain around my bed was snapped back. I blinked against the harsh light. Standing there was a man I hadn't seen in 12 years. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than this entire ward. His hair was thinner and whiter than I remembered, and he was leaning slightly on a silver-headed cane, but his eyes were still as sharp as flint. It was my father, Samson Miller. He didn't hug me. He didn't cry. He just stood there, looking down at me with an expression that was impossible to read. He looked at the peeling paint on the walls, the stained linoleum, and the cheap plastic pitcher of water on my bedside table. "You always were stubborn, Brian," he said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in my chest. "I told you that living like a commoner would eventually lead to a common tragedy." I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. How did you find me?" "I've always known where you were," he replied, pulling a small wooden chair over and sitting down. He looked at my chart with a look of pure disgust. "I watched you marry that girl. I watched you play house in that cramped apartment. I waited for you to realize that you were meant for more. It seems it took a semi-truck to knock some sense into you." I looked away. "She's gone, Dad. She took everything. I can't even pay for the surgery to fix my legs." Arthur let out a short, dry laugh. "She didn't take everything. She took the crumbs I allowed you to have. She thinks she won a prize, but she only walked away with the bait." He leaned closer, his shadow falling over my bed. "I'm dying, Brian. Cancer. The doctors give me a year, maybe less. My empire needs a head, and my bloodline needs a future. I had a trust set up for you the day you were born. It's worth more than the company Ashley works for. But there were conditions. I didn't want a spoiled brat inheriting my life's work. I wanted a man who knew the value of $1 and the sting of betrayal." He pulled a gold pen from his pocket and tapped it against the bed rail. "The trust activates under 2 conditions," he said. "First, you must be legally divorced. I wouldn't let that woman touch a cent of my money if she were the last person on earth. Second, You have to prove you have the spine to run the firm, literally and figuratively. I looked at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. She already filed. She served me the papers right here 4 days ago. Samson nodded slowly. I know. My lawyers were watching. She thinks she's clever, but she's played right into my hands. By filing now, while you are penniless and incapacitated, she has forfeited her right to any future assets. She wanted out of a sinking ship. She didn't realize she was jumping off a yacht. He stood up and straightened his jacket. He looked at the nurse who had just entered the room to check my vitals. Nurse, he said, not even looking at her, prepare my son for transport. He's being moved to the private wing at the Mayo Clinic. A helicopter will be on the roof in 20 minutes. Sir, we need authorization, the nurse started. I just bought this hospital's debt 10 minutes ago, Arthur interrupted. I am the authorization. Move him. Now. As they began to prep me for the move, my father leaned down one last time. The world thinks you're broken, Brian. Your wife thinks you're a footnote. Let them think that. We're going to disappear for a while. You're going to learn how to walk, and then you're going to learn how to hunt. When we come back, Ashley isn't just going to regret leaving you. She's going to regret ever knowing your name. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt the cold, hard weight of my heritage settling into my bones. The ordinary Brian Miller died in that car crash. The man being lifted onto the gurney was someone else entirely. I looked at my father and gave a small, grim nod. Make it 18 minutes, I said. I'm ready to go. The transition from the noisy ward to the private clinic was like moving from a basement to a palace. My new room didn't smell like sickness. It smelled like expensive leather and fresh air. But the luxury didn't make the work any easier. In fact, it made it harder. Samson Miller didn't pay for comfort. He paid for results. Pain is just information, Brian, Samson told me on the first day of my physical therapy. He stood by the window, watching me struggle to wiggle a single toe. It tells you where you are. Use it. If it hurts, it means you're still alive. If you're alive, you can win. The first few months were a blur of agony and sweat. While Ashley was out in the city, likely spending the last of our joint savings on champagne and rebound dates, I was screaming into a towel as a team of world-class specialists forced my muscles to remember their purpose. Samson didn't go easy on me. He moved his entire satellite office into the suite next to mine. Between my grueling therapy sessions, he dropped thick folders of market reports and acquisition strategies on my lap. Your legs are the foundation, but your mind is the weapon, Samson said. He was looking thinner every day, his own battle with cancer leaving him pale, but his voice never lost its iron edge. While you learn to stand, you will learn how to dismantle a company from the inside out. I want you to study Ashley's employer. I want you to know their debt-to-equity ratio better than they do. I worked until my eyes burned and my muscles spasmed. I didn't check social media. I didn't look at photos of my old life. I let the world believe Brian Miller had simply vanished into the system. Just another tragic story of a man who lost everything in an accident. By the 6-month mark, something shifted. It started with a twitch in my left calf, then a flex in my quad. The day I took my first step between the parallel bars, Samson didn't cheer. He just checked his watch and said, 6 months and 4 days. You're behind schedule. Do it again. I did it again and again. As my body rebuilt itself, so did my identity. I stopped thinking like the man who was content with enough. I started thinking like a Miller. I saw the flaws in Ashley's logic. She had left me because she thought I was a liability, but in doing so, she had handed me the ultimate legal shield. Because she had initiated the divorce and claimed I was incapacitated to seize our modest assets, she had effectively locked herself out of the Miller fortune. Under the terms of the trust Sampson had built, the inheritance was classified as premarital, protected bloodline capital. By the time the 8th month rolled around, I wasn't just walking, I was running. I spent 4 hours a day in the gym and 6 hours a day in board meetings via video call. The board members of Miller International didn't know I was a cripple in a rehab center. They only saw a cold, calculated strategist who was finding efficiencies they had missed for years. Sampson watched me from his armchair, a thin smile playing on his lips. "You have the hunger now," he whispered. "The kind of hunger you only get when you've stared at a hospital ceiling for a month. Don't ever lose that." One evening, after a particularly long session, I finally allowed myself to look up Ashley's name. I used a burner account. She hadn't been quiet. Her feed was full of photos of her new life. There were pictures of her at high-end bars, captioned with things like "finally breathing again" and "leaving the dead weight behind." There was a photo of her with a man named Marcus, a flashy lifestyle coach with a bleached smile. They were standing in front of the car I had spent 3 years saving for. She looked happy. She looked victorious. I felt a surge of anger, but it was cold, not hot. It didn't make me want to scream. It made me want to work. I saw that her company, a mid-sized marketing firm called Briggs and Associates, was struggling with a series of bad investments. They were looking for a silent partner to bail them out. They were desperate for a miracle. I closed the laptop and looked over at Sampson. He was asleep in his chair, his breathing shallow. He had given me the tools, the money, and the motivation. Now it was time to build the trap. "I'm going to buy Briggs," I said quietly, even though he couldn't hear me. "And I'm going to make sure Ashley is the one who has to hand me the keys." I stood up from my bed, no longer needing the cane. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Ashley was celebrating her freedom. She thought she had won the divorce. She didn't realize she was just a character in a story I was now writing. The ordinary Brian was gone. The successor had arrived. Sampson's health was fading fast, but his mind remained as sharp as a razor. In his final weeks, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future. Specifically, we talked about Briggs marketing. "They're over-leveraged, Brian," Sampson whispered from his bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "They spent too much trying to look successful and not enough on being successful. They are a house of cards. All you have to do is provide the wind." I took over the negotiations through a shell company called Miller Holdings. To the board at Briggs, I was just a voice on a speakerphone or a signature on a digital contract. I made sure my name was never mentioned. I wanted to be a ghost until the moment the trap snapped shut. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Ashley. Without my steady income to ground her, her spending had spiraled. She and her new boyfriend, Marcus, were living a life of pure fiction. They stayed in expensive hotels they couldn't afford and posted about entrepreneurial freedom. Ashley had even taken out a second mortgage on the apartment she had stolen from me. She was betting everything on a massive year-end bonus from Briggs, a bonus that was tied to a company performance that no longer existed. The day Sampson passed away, I didn't cry. I didn't have time. I spent the morning at his funeral, a private, silent affair, and the afternoon signing the final acquisition papers for Briggs. By 4 p.m., I owned the floor where my ex-wife worked. I owned the desk she sat at. I even owned the lease on the car she was driving, which Briggs had been subsidizing as a corporate perk. I decided to let her sit in her false sense of security for one more week. I wanted her to feel the victory of the acquisition. News hit the office that a massive conglomerate had bought Briggs, saving it from bankruptcy. The office was reportedly throwing a celebration. Ashley posted a photo of a champagne glass with the caption, "Hard work pays off. New owners, new era, new heights." She had no idea the new era was her reckoning. I spent that week preparing. I traded my hospital gown for a tailored Italian suit. I spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing my gait. My limp was gone, replaced by a measured, powerful stride. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. I looked like Samson. I looked like a man who was owed a debt. Monday morning arrived. I pulled up to the Briggs headquarters in a blacked-out SUV. Two security guards, already briefed by my legal team, met me at the entrance. We bypassed the lobby and went straight to the executive floor. The atmosphere in the office was electric. Everyone was talking about the mystery savior who had bought the company. I walked through the glass doors of the marketing department. I saw her immediately. Ashley was standing near the break room, laughing with Marcus. She looked radiant, wearing a dress that probably cost 3 months of my old salary. I stopped 10 feet away. The office began to go quiet as people noticed the stranger in the expensive suit and the two security guards. Ashley turned, a polite, professional smile on her face. "Can I help you? Are you here for the management meeting?" She didn't recognize me. It had only been 10 months, but in her mind, Brian Miller was a broken man rotting in a state-funded ward. She was looking at a billionaire, and her brain couldn't bridge the gap. "The meeting has been moved, Ashley," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and carried through the entire room. She froze. The smile didn't just fade, it disintegrated. Her face went pale, then a sickly shade of gray. She dropped her phone, the screen shattering against the hardwood floor. "Brian," she whispered. Her voice was thin, like a ghost's. That's not possible." Marcus stepped forward, trying to play the protector. "Hey, buddy, I don't know who you are, but you can't just—" I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes locked on Ashley. "The dead weight is back, Ash. And it turns out I own this building, which means I own your contract. And your contract has a morality clause regarding the misappropriation of company-subsidized assets." I pulled a folder from under my arm and handed it to her. It wasn't divorce papers this time. It was an eviction notice for the apartment and a repossession order for the car. "You said you couldn't be married to a man whose life just stopped," I said, stepping closer so only she could hear me. "Well, my life started the moment you walked out of that ICU. Yours, however, just hit a dead end. The entire office was staring. The silence was absolute. Ashley looked down at the papers, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't even read the words. "You can't do this," she stammered. "The divorce, the settlement." "The settlement you rushed through while I was incapacitated." I smiled, and it felt like ice. "That settlement only applied to the assets we held at the time. It didn't cover Miller International. You were so eager to get rid of a cripple that you forgot to check who my father was." I turned to the security guards. "Escort Ms. Miller and her guest out of the building. They are no longer employees or associates of Briggs." As the guards moved in, the reality finally hit her. She didn't scream or fight. She just stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that the man she had abandoned hadn't just survived. He had become her judge. Watching Ashley being escorted out of the building was supposed to be the end of it. But desperation does strange things to people like her. Instead of fading away quietly, she decided to double down. Within 48 hours, I was served with a massive lawsuit. Ashley wasn't just asking for a payout. She was claiming that I had intentionally misled her about my family's wealth during our entire marriage. Her lawyer, a shark named Henderson, was arguing fraudulent concealment. They claimed I had faked the severity of my injuries to manipulate her into a quick divorce so I could keep the Miller fortune for myself. It was a bold move. It was also a suicide mission. The courtroom was cold and smelled of old paper and floor wax. Ashley sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a conservative black suit, trying her best to look like a grieving victim. She kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, occasionally glancing at the gallery to see if any reporters were there. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted the world to think I was a cruel billionaire who had tricked a loyal wife. When Henderson stood up to give his opening statement, he painted a picture of a woman who had been emotionally exhausted by a husband who hid his true identity. He talked about her fragile mental state in the ICU and claimed I had used my father's influence to pressure her into leaving. I sat at the defense table, silent and motionless. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I just waited for my turn. When my lead counsel, a woman who had worked for Samson for 20 years, stood up, she didn't give a long speech. She simply opened a laptop and turned a monitor toward the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff claims she was misled and pressured. We would like to enter into evidence the ICU security footage from the day the divorce was served." The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. The court watched as Ashley stood over my immobile body. They heard her voice, cold, sharp, and biting. "I can't be married to a man whose life just stopped," the recording played. "I'm not spending my prime years changing bedpans. I'm taking the apartment. I'm taking the car." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The grieving victim at the table next to me stopped dabbing her eyes. Her face went from pale to white, but we weren't done. My lawyer pulled up a series of text messages Ashley had sent to Marcus, her boyfriend, weeks before the accident. In them, she complained about my boring job and joked about how much easier her life would be if I just disappeared so she could collect on the life insurance. As for the claim of fraudulent concealment regarding the Miller assets, my lawyer continued, Mr. Miller was under a strict legal trust agreement established by Samson Miller. He had no access to those funds, nor any guarantee of an inheritance, until the divorce was finalized and his father passed away. He didn't hide wealth. He didn't have it yet. The final blow was the financial audit. We showed the court exactly where the money from our joint accounts went. It didn't go to medical bills or administrative holding. It went to a down payment on a luxury condo for her and Marcus, and a shopping spree at a designer boutique. All while I was still in a medically induced coma. The judge didn't even retire to his chambers to deliberate. He looked at Ashley with a level of disgust I had only ever seen on my father's face. "Miss Miller," the judge said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "this court finds your claims not only meritless but offensive. You didn't leave because you were misled. You left because you thought your husband was no longer of use to you. You gambled on his demise and you lost. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Not only did she get nothing, but the judge ordered her to pay my legal fees. Fees that, given the caliber of my legal team, would take her the rest of her life to pay off. As the bailiff called for a recess, Ashley stood frozen. Marcus, the man she had traded me for, was already halfway out the door. He didn't even look back at her. He was a parasite, and he knew the host was finally dead. I stood up, adjusted my cufflinks, and began to walk out. Ashley intercepted me in the hallway, her hair disheveled, her mask of perfection completely shattered. "Brian, please," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. "I made a mistake. I was scared. The doctors told me you'd never be the same. I didn't know what to do." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I felt nothing. No anger, no hate, just a profound sense of distance. "You were right about one thing, Ashley," I said quietly. "I'll never be the same. But that's the best thing that ever happened to me." I gently unhooked her fingers from my arm and walked toward the exit, my stride steady and sure. I didn't look back to see her collapse onto the bench. I had a company to run, a legacy to build, and a life that was finally mine. The first year as the head of Miller International was a whirlwind of 100-hour work weeks and high-stakes decisions. I wasn't just maintaining Samson's empire, I was expanding it. I moved the headquarters to a glass tower that overlooked the city, a constant reminder of how far I had come from that cramped hospital ward. My physical recovery was complete, but the mental scars made me sharper. I became known in the business world as a man who was fair, but possessed a memory like an elephant. I never forgot a favor, and I certainly never forgot a betrayal. While my profile rose, Ashley's world continued to shrink. Without the car, the apartment, or the high-paying job at Briggs, she had been forced to move into a tiny studio on the outskirts of the city. Marcus had disappeared the moment the judge ruled against her, taking whatever jewelry and electronics she had left. She was working 2 retail jobs just to keep up with the interest on the legal fees she owed me. I could have waived those fees. To me, the money was a rounding error, but I didn't. Every month when her check arrived at my legal department, it served as a reminder that actions have consequences. One rainy Tuesday, my assistant buzzed my desk. "Sir, there's a woman in the lobby named Ashley. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's a matter of life and death. Security is about to remove her." I looked at the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Bring her up," I said. When the elevator doors opened, I almost didn't recognize her. The polished, predatory woman who had served me papers in the ICU was gone. In her place was someone who looked exhausted and hollow. Her coat was thin, and her shoes were soaked through. She stood in the middle of my vast office, looking at the art on the walls and the sprawling view of the city, a view she could have shared if she had just waited. "You look well, Brian," she said, her voice trembling. "I am well, Ashley. What do you want?" She took a shaky breath. "I'm losing everything. My landlord is evicting me. My wages are being garnished for your lawyers. I can't breathe. I'm asking for mercy. Please, just drop the debt. You have millions. You don't need my $200 a month." I stood up and walked around the desk. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of her. I remembered the smell of her perfume in the hospital, the scent of abandonment. Now she just smelled like the rain and cold. "You're right," I said. "I don't need the money, but you seem to think this is about money. It's not. It's about the fact that when I couldn't breathe, you tried to take the air out of the room. When I couldn't walk, you tried to take the ground from under me. I was scared," she cried out. "Being scared is an explanation, Ashley. It's not an excuse. You didn't just leave me. You tried to ruin me so you could feel better about your own greed." I walked over to a file on my desk and opened it. Inside were photos of the ICU Patient Protection Program I had been quietly funding for the last 6 months. It was a foundation that provided legal aid and financial support to patients whose families had abandoned them during long-term recoveries. "I won't drop the debt," I said, my voice as cold as the glass behind me. "But I'll tell you what I'll do. Every cent you pay me goes directly into this foundation. You are going to spend the next 20 years of your life paying for the care of people who were treated exactly like you treated me. You wanted to be a nurse, remember? Well, now you're finally helping the sick." She looked at the photos of the patients, people in wheelchairs, people in rehab, people who looked just like I did 10 months ago. She realized then that she was never going to be free of me. She was tied to my shadow, forced to fund the very kindness she had refused to show. "Please, Brian," she whispered, "don't do this. The meeting is over, Ashley," I said, turning my back to her. "I have a board meeting in 5 minutes. Use the service elevator on your way out." I didn't watch her leave. I sat back down at my desk and focused on the glowing monitors. I had turned my pain into a purpose. I had turned her betrayal into a legacy. As the elevator dinged, signaling her departure, I felt the final weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the man she dumped, and I wasn't just Samson's son. I was Brian Miller, and I was just getting started. 3 years passed. My father, Samson, had once told me that time doesn't heal all wounds. It just gives you the perspective to see which ones were necessary. The Miller Foundation for Patient Advocacy was now a national powerhouse. We had successfully lobbied for the Marital Protection Act, a law that made it a criminal offense for a spouse to drain joint assets while the other was medically incapacitated. I spent a lot of time in hospitals, but not as a patient. I walked the halls as a benefactor, a man who ensured that no one else would ever wake up to find their life stolen by the person they trusted most. My life was full. I had built a new circle of friends, people who valued integrity over status. I had even started seeing a woman named Elena, a physical therapist who had worked with me during my darkest days. She had seen me at my weakest, and she loved me for the strength it took to survive it. She didn't care about the Miller name. She cared about the man who refused to stay down. I rarely thought about Ashley anymore. She had become a ghost in my periphery, a cautionary tale I told myself whenever I felt too comfortable. But the world is smaller than we think. I was at a charity gala for a children's hospital when I saw a woman clearing empty glasses from a table near the bar. She was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting catering uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun, and her face looked weathered, as if she had spent every day of the last few years fighting a losing battle. It was Ashley. She was working for the very catering company I used to work for before I met her, the same one she had mocked me for being a part of. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. I didn't try to hide. I walked toward the bar to order a drink. As I approached, she looked up. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling ballroom went silent. She dropped the tray she was holding. Glass shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I'm so sorry," she stammered, dropping to her knees to pick up the shards. "Leave it," I said quietly. She froze, her hands hovering over the broken glass. She looked up at me, and I saw the recognition hit her. She saw the custom suit. She saw the watch that cost more than she would earn in a decade. She saw the woman, Elena, waiting for me with a smile. "Brian," she breathed. Her voice was trembling. I'm working the double shift. I'm almost caught up on the payments for this month. Please don't tell my manager." I looked down at her. In her eyes, I didn't see the woman I had once loved. I didn't even see the villain who had betrayed me. I just saw a person who had made a bet on the wrong side of humanity and was now paying the price. "I'm not here to get you fired, Ashley," I said. "I'm the keynote speaker." I reached into my pocket, pulled out $100 bill, and placed it on the bar. "For the mess. Keep the change." I walked away. I didn't look back to see if she was crying. I didn't look back to see the pity in the eyes of the other guests. I walked onto the stage, the spotlight hitting me with a warmth I had earned through fire. I stood before the crowd of city leaders and philanthropists. I looked at the teleprompter, but I didn't need it. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. "Some people believe that success is about how much you can take from the world," I began, my voice steady and resonant. "But I learned the hard way that true power is about what you do when the world takes everything from you. When you are left with nothing but your breath and your name, that is when you find out who you really are." I glanced toward the back of the room, where Ashley was being ushered into the kitchen by her supervisor. "Loyalty isn't a luxury," I continued. "It's a foundation. And if you build your life on anything else, don't be surprised when the floor gives way." The room erupted in applause. As I stepped down from the podium, I realized that the revenge I had spent years planning wasn't the satisfaction of seeing her suffer. It was the satisfaction of knowing that she no longer had the power to make me feel anything at all. The gala ended, but the encounter stayed with me for a different reason than I expected. For the first time, I didn't feel the surge of cold satisfaction I had anticipated. I just felt finished. The story of Brian and Ashley had been a long, grueling book, and I was finally on the very last page. A week later, I received a letter at my office. It wasn't from a lawyer, and it wasn't a formal document. It was a handwritten note on cheap, lined paper. It was from Ashley. "Brian," it read, I'm not writing to ask for money or for you to drop the debt. I'm writing because I finally understand. I saw you on that stage. I saw the way people looked at you, not because of your money, but because of your strength. I realized that I didn't just leave a man in a hospital bed. I left the only person who ever truly cared about me. I thought you were the one who was broken, but it was me. I'm moving away. I'm going back to my parents' small town. I'll keep making the payments to your foundation. It's the only good thing I've ever contributed to. I'm sorry for everything. I set the letter down on my mahogany desk. Part of me wondered if it was one last play for sympathy, one last attempt to crack the armor of the Miller name. But as I looked at the shaky handwriting and the tear-smudged ink, I realized it didn't matter if it was sincere or not. My response would be the same. I called my head of legal. "The payments from Ashley Miller," I said, staring out at the skyline. "Set up an anonymous trust. Direct her monthly payments back into an education fund for her. If she ever tries to go back to school or get a certification, the fund will cover it. But don't tell her it's from me. Tell her it's a government grant." "Sir?" my lawyer asked, sounding confused. "After everything she did?" "I don't want her debt," I replied. "I want her gone from my ledger, completely. If she stays stuck in the past, she's still a part of my life. I'm closing the account." A few days later, I made one final trip. I didn't go to a boardroom or a courthouse. I went back to the hospital where it all began. The ICU wing had been renovated, thanks to a donation from my foundation. It was brighter now, less terrifying. I walked to the room where I had spent those first agonizing days. A young man was lying there, his head stabilized by a halo brace, his eyes fixed on the ceiling with that same look of hollow terror I knew so well. His wife was sitting by his side, holding his hand, her eyes red from crying, but her grip firm. I didn't say a word. I just stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. That was the life I had wanted. The ordinary life where love meant staying when the lights went out. I hadn't gotten it with Ashley, but seeing it exist for someone else made the pain of the past feel like a fair price to pay. As I walked out of the hospital, I felt the sun on my face. My gait was perfect. My mind was clear. I had survived the betrayal, I had inherited the empire, and I had settled the score. But more importantly, I had found the man I was supposed to be. The broken man was a memory. The vengeful man was a ghost. I stepped into my car and told the driver to head home. I had a dinner date with Elena, a new project starting in the morning, and a future that didn't have a single shadow of the past left in it. People often ask me if I hate her. They look at the tower I built, the laws I passed, and the empire I lead, and they assume it was all fueled by a burning need for revenge. They think I wake up every morning wanting to crush the woman who left me for dead. But the truth is much simpler and perhaps a bit more cold. I don't think about her at all. You see, the greatest revenge isn't a lawsuit. It isn't a public shaming or watching someone struggle. The greatest revenge is becoming a version of yourself that no longer requires their validation, or even their presence. When Ashley walked out of that ICU room, she thought she was leaving a broken man. She thought my value was tied to my ability to provide her with a lifestyle. When the lifestyle stopped, she thought I stopped. She failed to realize that a man's worth isn't found in his legs, his bank account, or his title. It's found in his resolve. I look back at that version of myself, the ordinary Brian who hid his heritage because he wanted to be loved for his heart. I don't regret him. He was a good man, but he was naive. He believed that loyalty was a given rather than something that has to be forged in the fire. The fire Ashley started didn't consume me. It tempered me. Today, the Miller Foundation ensures that thousands of people have a fighting chance when their world falls apart. We provide the legal teeth to protect the vulnerable and the financial bridge to help them cross over from victim to survivor. My father, Samson, would have been proud of the profit margins, but I think he would have been more proud of the grit. He knew that a miller isn't defined by what they inherit, but by what they build from the ruins.